Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Guys, and welcome back to Sela Social Studies. Today we're going to be covering the first of 5 installments that are going to cover World War II. So on today's first installment of the 5, we're going to be covering the beginning of World War II, otherwise known as the causes of World War II. What events had to occur in what type of order to make World War II even happen? Well, World War II, the most deadly war in the history of the world, fought during a time that, economically speaking, the world was in the state of depression. European nations were in debt. The United States was in the middle of the Great Depression. Over 70 million people perished from the face of the earth. How could anything good come from such a horrendous act of violence? Well, the United States can actually trace the end of the Great Depression to the war. However, was such the loss of life worth it? Now, to understand anything about World War II, the underlying issues and events that preceded the war need to be examined first. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles left Germany in complete shambles and disarray. Germany was forced to take blame for World War I, pay a reparation amount of $33 billion US, which in today's money is around $400 billion, and have their army reduced to a glorified police force. Europe was destroyed. European economies were destroyed, and Europeans wanted Germany to pay. The first to rise to power was the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. In 1919, he created and quickly expanded the Fascist Party. Now, fascism was the belief that the nation is above the individual and everything is good for the government, or for the good of the government. Now, Mussolini and the Fascist Party formed small armies named the Black Shirts to help give a powerful force behind the party. By 1922, the Fascist Party had gained entrance into the Italian government coalition, and by 1925, Mussolini would name himself dictator, or Il Duce of Italy. Mussolini wanted to transform Italy into a powerful European nation and aided Nazi Germany during World War II. In 1919, not too long after Mussolini had taken strides in Italy, a German World War I veteran was looking for a way that he could make a difference in the German army that he came to adore. Adolf Hitler was ordered by one of his commanders to go attend a meeting of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, infiltrate the party, and report back on the dangers of the new political regime. This was an order that the veteran disobeyed. Instead of infiltrating and reporting on the National Socialist German Workers' Party, later known as the Nazi Party, Hitler joined them. By 1920, Hitler was in charge of the propaganda department of the party. Quickly rising through the ranks because of his oratorical or public speaking skills, Hitler was voted almost unanimously the Führer of the Nazi Party in 1921. The Nazi Party would rule as a totalitarian government, and the Nazi Party would control everything for the good of the country, even the lives of the citizens, through fear. Naming himself the dictator of Germany, Adolf Hitler would remain in control until his death in 1945. Hitler was furious about how Germany was treated in the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler hated the European powers that stripped a once proud Germany of its heritage. Hitler created a plan that was to control the destiny of Germany, and under Hitler's plan, Germany would abandon their place in the Treaty of Versailles, expand the German army and the German land holdings, otherwise known as Lebensraum, for German occupation, create a pure Aryan nation, and eradicate the Jewish population. In the East, Japan was imperializing China. The Japanese were all but ignored during the Treaty of Versailles, and the land of the rising sun was rising. Prior to Roosevelt's inauguration, Japan had withdrawn itself from the League of Nations for the condemnation of its aggression in China. It looked as though the war was imminent, with the United States being determined to avoid it at all costs. Now, the first warlike act by one country to another without just cause, otherwise known as aggression, was not by the Nazi powerhouse, but by Mussolini and the Italians. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia, and despite the desperate pleas from Ethiopia's leader, Haile Selassie, the League of Nations refused to act. Hitler, soon to follow, occupied the Rhineland, which is a strip of land in western Germany next to France and Belgium, in March of 1938. The Nazis mobilized its army, invaded, and created a union with Austria. By September 1938, Britain, France, and Italy saw how the Nazi regime is starting to spread through certain European nations. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Britain, statesman Edouard Daladier of France, Mussolini of Italy, and Hitler met in Germany in what is now named the Munich Conference. Now, the memories of World War I are still fresh on the minds of European nations. Chamberlain and Daladier have discussed letting Hitler take the Sudetenland, a portion of Czechoslovakia where roughly 3.5 million Germans resided, and in response, Hitler would not continue to occupy other nations. Britain and France were practicing appeasement, the idea of giving in to Hitler's demands in an attempt to avoid another world conflict. The result of the Munich Conference was that in October 1938, Germany invaded and occupied the Sudetenland. Chamberlain returned to Britain as a hero returned from war, promising that another war with Germany was avoided, that he achieved quote-unquote peace in our time. Chamberlain learned a quick lesson not to trust Hitler, because after such a brash statement of being a peacemaker, in March of 1939, Nazi Germany openly mocked the British Prime Minister and occupied all of Czechoslovakia. While Mussolini and Hitler were pretty much having their way, conquering European nations, the Allied forces were sitting dormant, hoping that the Axis juggernaut would eventually stop. There were no countries who were willing to drag the world into another great war, and so many were unwilling to step up and challenge the Axis powers. Even the mighty Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union were not ready for the challenge. In the summer of 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact promising that they would not attack each other or aid in any third-party attacks, and then there would be spheres of influence protocols over the control of Poland and other Baltic nations. Now that Germany and Russia had made a pact not to be aggressive against each other, Hitler was now free to seize the territory Germany had lost to Poland as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi troops crossed into Poland from the west. As a result, on September 3rd, France and Great Britain declared war on Germany. World War II had officially begun. The opposing sides at the beginning of the war were called the Allied and the Axis powers. The Allied powers consisted of Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, or Russia. The United States would join the Allied powers after the war was in full effect. The Axis powers were led by Nazi Germany, Italy, and in East Asia, Japan. Now, during 1939 through the beginning of 1940, the war in Europe was not the raging inferno of gunfire and death that people usually recall when discussing the war. German forces were quiet during the winter months, and even though Stalin moved troops into eastern Poland, aggression was near non-existent, so much so that people began to call this a phony war. Then on April 9th, 1940, the German Blitzkrieg, or a lightning war, and this lightning war was a coordinated military effort by tanks, motorized infantry, artillery, and aircraft to create an overwhelming local superiority and combat power to defeat the opponent and break through its defenses when on the attack. The Blitzkrieg quickly occupied Norway and Denmark. Hitler then blasted his vast army through the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, settling into France, ultimately forcing the French to surrender. Ironically enough, when Hitler arrived to accept the French surrender, it happened on the same rail car in which Germany surrendered to end World War I. With the French surrender, Britain remained the lone European democracy against the German war machine. All right, guys, I'll see you next time when we talk about the second installment of World War II.